Hello and welcome to Women in Conservation Wednesdays. Today we are here with Rhiannon Lamb, who is a master's student studying marine sciences. So would you tell me what you're currently doing?
Hi, yeah, so as Millie just said, I'm a MPhil student at Newcastle University, and I'm currently studying Minke whale vocalizations from the west coast of Scotland.
That sounds so cool. So could you tell me what inspired you to begin working with marine mammals?
So I think initially it was just the sheer, this is going to sound silly, but the sheer size of marine mammals in general. So, I mean, blue whales are the largest mammal living on Earth right now, and just to know that they are under the sea is pretty mind-blowing. But what sort of inspired me to study them further was understanding how marine mammals have cultural behaviors and their social behaviors as well. So I think, I mean, a lot of people might have seen on Blue Planet dolphins using tools to play with, or even to help them feed. They're complex sort of social structures that we still don't really know much about yet, and the individual calls as well. So those were the main sort of things that got me interested in marine mammals specifically, and just sort of the general, we don't really know much about them yet.
That sounds so cool. How do you hope that it will benefit the conservation sector?
Yeah, so thank you. I'll just give a little background about actually what I'm studying first, so it might give a bit of context. So as I said, I'm studying Minke whale calls from West Scotland, and Minke whales produce a call that's called a pulse train, which is sort of like several little pulses strung together, and there can be slow ones, fast ones, and sort of constant ones. And if you compare the sort of literature around Minke whales to, for example, humpback whales, there's hardly anything about them. They've sort of been missed off the radar, which is really bizarre to me, because you know they're still one of the baleen whales, and we know nothing about them. If you compare humpback whales, we've studied their song since the 1960s, but Minke whales, we've only recently discovered one of their calls in 2014. So there's a big sort of delay. And so what I'm trying to work out is, well, hopefully work out why they use these calls called pulse trains, when they're used in the Scottish waters, and also what time of day they're used. So if we can figure out at what time of year they're calling, then that sort of gives us a bit of a picture of sort of why they're in these waters in the first place. Are they here between this time and this time? And from my general studies, they're here between March and October, which suggests that either they're for feeding or breeding. We don't really know. And so if you study these characteristics, you can understand how you can mitigate their threats. And in Scottish waters in particular, there's three main threats. The first one being whaling. So these Minke whales, we think they come down from Icelandic waters, and the nations of Iceland, Norway, Greenland, and Japan still conduct direct harvesting of Minke whales, sadly. And it's particularly Minke whales that they focus on right now, because they are seen as healthy in the population status, and they're relatively easier to harvest than, say, a humpback whale, for example. So that's one of their main threats in these waters. The second one is entanglement, and studies have shown that around 50% of Minke whale deaths are due to entanglement, which is relatively high, yet the conservation status of these areas, they're sort of on their way, but they're not there yet. And so hopefully my research can sort of show that this area is a really key habitat for them. They potentially might be here for feeding or breeding within these times. So if we protect these areas, hopefully entanglement won't be such an issue. And then lastly, noise pollution. As with many areas of the ocean, I think people used to think the oceans were quiet, and they're really not now. And so there's these things called acoustic deterrent devices, which are used by Scottish aquaculture sites to deter seals, particularly from predating on salmon and haddock and all the fisheries there. And if you were to map them out, which someone has done recently, Findley et al., you can see that actually all of these areas that the acoustic devices are expanding are overlapping, and they're in the same vocal ranges as Minke whales and several other marine mammals in these areas. And then the last sort of noise pollution threat in these areas in particular are military operations. So in West Scotland, there's this thing called Joint Warrior, which is Europe's largest military exercise, which happens there. And it encompasses so many nations, about 16 different warships, aerial surveys, and around 4,000 people. And this happens twice a year. And it's important because such exposure to noise in such a short period of time has been linked to strandings, and there's some evidence to suggest that it's affecting minke whales as well as other marine mammals in these areas. So hopefully my research can sort of showcase that these are key habitats, here's what's going wrong, and here's how we can sort of embed this in future conservation, because as I say, minke whales are getting missed off the radar and I don't want that to happen.
Your work sounds so important and sounds like it will have such good consequences for minke whales, as well as probably other species as a result. So you've already told us what inspired you to get involved with working with marine mammals. Could you tell us how you got into the conservation sector in general?
Yeah, of course. So I think maybe the same as other people, I think the word conservation sort of came to my mind, and sort of I was taught about what it sort of means in my A-level studies. So I studied environmental science, and from that it was mostly how we combat anthropogenic threats, what they are, how it's devastating biodiversity in general. But it doesn't really resonate with me until my undergraduate studies, where it was actually applied and you could kind of get a more comprehensive understanding of the word conservation. And then further that, in my second year of university, I was lucky enough to volunteer with a charity called Love the Oceans, and who Francesca, I believe, is on your first Routes to Success speaker. So I won't say that much about Love the Oceans, but it was there that I understood how collecting data and how meaningful that data can be, and how it can impact in such a short period of time and such a small spatial scale. And it meant more than just numbers. And I think by the time I was there, that was 5 years of data that was being collected to try and achieve the overarching aim of the marine protected area. So it was really my connection in another country, bizarrely, that sort of linked conservation in my mind and sort of stuck with me.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will be able to relate to that. Although you're relatively early in your career in conservation, how have you found the experience of working in this sector as a woman? Do you feel like it has had an impact on your career so far?
Yeah, I definitely feel like it's had an impact on my career, and I think maybe I'm just lucky, but I think overall it's been a positive experience, and there's no real sort of sexism or anything going on really in sort of my journey. But I think maybe that's been because I've been surrounded by people who have been really supportive, or in fact it's most of the time it's been females that are actually leading in the industry that I've been working in, which I think is quite rare. I currently work in a different sector, so I work in engineering at the moment, and the gender bias there is very different than it is in marine biology or conservation in particular. So I think maybe I've been very lucky and I've had inspirational women sort of leading the way, which is really nice and refreshing to hear. Actually, the only sort of area that I feel there would be sort of bias would be maybe achieving funding. I think it's more difficult if you're from sort of minority backgrounds or even a female in general. But as I say, I haven't actually experienced that firsthand, so it's just my speculation. But I'm sort of hoping that isn't the case, and that I'm proved wrong.
Yeah, I think we've heard from quite a lot of people on the podcast that they found that the marine biology kind of realm especially seems to be kind of dominated by women, which is really, really great to hear, and that they've had a lot of inspirational women as role models. So just moving on from that, what's your favourite memory from working in conservation?
I think, again, linking back to my time in Mozambique, because before I went there, I'd only really studied marine mammals sort of from the books, and I'd never really seen any marine mammals apart from this one porpoise in Devon, which was great, but it was a while ago and it's a very fading memory. So in fact, with your colleague Shannon, we went out onto a conservation safari to try and sort of see what we could see. And it was just the first time that I saw a humpback whale breach. That in itself is breathtaking. And I think you can watch as many videos as you can online, but you never really get the full impact. And quickly followed by that breach was a teeny tiny baby humpback whale breaching as well, which was very, very sweet. It was almost like the mother and the calf were sort of playing and teaching each other, it was great. And in fact, I've got a picture of myself sort of on the side of the boat watching in awe, because it was amazing. And I'd do anything to see something like that again, which hopefully I will. So I'd say that's probably my favorite memory, and it does link to conservation slightly because I was volunteering there and listening to their calls there. So yeah, that's probably my favorite memory.
That must have been such a fantastic experience. I'm so jealous. I'd love to see that. So just finally, do you have any tips for people wanting to get into conservation?
Yeah, I think like anything with science in general, I think it's hard work. And if you're passionate about it, then that will pay off, and that will be evident in your work. But I think being resilient and flexible, again, anything in science, it doesn't always go to plan, but if you've got that mindset, then I think that it'll be relatively smooth journey for you. Another sort of little bit of advice maybe would be to accept the criticism, because you are going to get it. But also on the flip side, stand up for what you believe in and sort of how you think things should be done, especially as a woman. Don't be told that you can't do this or you shouldn't do this, because I think that's not how we do it anymore. It's 2022. And particularly in conservation, I think if you're trying to change policy and you're trying to change people's minds, it won't happen right away. It's a long-term process, but if you stick at it and you're enthusiastic, then I think that'll go far. And I do think conservation, it's a very rewarding job. If you're in that field, I think it can be very rewarding. You can make a real change. And I think our generation specifically, I think we have sort of woken up and we understand what we need to do. And I think that we'll probably make an impact that will last forever, hopefully, which I think is really good. And I'm glad to be part of that generation.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I'm always really inspired whenever I talk to people on this podcast, and how great our kind of generation is and how great the people in the sector are at the moment. Well, they've always been great, but just especially now. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, and thank you for your great advice and for sharing all your experiences and things about your research with us. It's been really amazing having you on here. Thank you very much.
You're more than welcome. And if anyone wants to get in contact, then please feel free to leave my email address. I'm happy to take any questions about anything.